Welcome to the Michigan in Focus podcast powered by the Center Square. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor of the Center Square Newswire Service. Michigan in Focus is a production of America's Talking Network. You can find all of the Center Square's great podcasts at americastalking.com. And we ask you to please subscribe to Michigan in Focus wherever you listen to your podcast. We're recording today on Thursday, February 16th, 2022. And joining me today, as they do every week, is Michigan correspondent Scott McClallen and editor-at-large Tom Gantert. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
Good morning, Bruce.
Morning. Okay, you're messing with people's minds. We're recording this in the afternoon, but Tom sleeps at odd hours, so we'll give him a pass.
3-hour shifts.
3-hour
shifts.
There we go.
Like the North American spotted owl.
I'll be seeing you in all the familiar places. So let's get started here. And I am filing a story later today, and it is on the toll road study that Tom and I discussed last week. And there's a very good organization, or they do very good work. It's very objective. It's nonpartisan. It's called the Citizens Resource Center of Michigan. And they posted a piece earlier this week where they challenged the conclusions of the toll road feasibility and implementation study that was commissioned by the Michigan Department of Transportation. And I should say that they actually commissioned this because it was part of a law where they had to examine this because they were looking for new ways to fund road repairs here in Michigan. But the CRC individual who wrote this piece, his name is Paul Dennis, and he's a research associate at CRC and has a background in engineering and is one of their more recent hires there. And according to him, he says it is unclear why the legislature assumed that a statewide tolling program would be determined feasible as to also require an implementation plan. Because what he asserts is that Michigan can't implement toll roads according to a federal highway law known as Section 129. What it can do, however, without changing the law and without federal permission, is to implement bridge tolls under the same law. So it seems like it's kind of a moot exercise. And this is something that Michigan taxpayers were on the hook for approximately $3.3 million for the study. So it's kind of interesting what probably will not happen here in the near future. So, Tom, you can rest assured that you won't be paying tolls on Michigan roads for the foreseeable future.
I got like two things on this that you brought up that I find interesting. The first thing is the idea that there's a law stopping this from happening. Laws change. And when properly incentivized to make more money for government, I wouldn't be surprised if things changed, if they found a way that this would actually bring in more money. Well,
certainly laws can change, Tom, but this is a difference between a federal law and a state wish list to make more money. So the federal law could conceivably be changed, but I would think that the wheels on that change would move a lot more slowly than they would if they were just fighting an uphill battle with a state law.
And also with technology today, the second point is that these tolls on bridges, anybody who's driven to Nashville knows that you don't even know you're going over a toll bridge. They just take a picture and send it to you in the mail. Or you see it on your credit card for somehow they get access to your credit card. So that is the way it works. So.
Right. And let's move along because we've got a lot of topics to talk about today. And
let's do my thing.
What's that?
Let's do my thing now.
You want to do? I was going to hold you to last because then I was just going to
No, I
check.
don't want to go
I was
last.
just going to check out and take my nap so I can for 3 hours.
I don't want to go last.
You don't want to go last. Okay, bang your spoon against the high chair, Tom. We'll talk about what you want to talk about.
Okay.
And
well,
and we're in my backyard now. We're talking about Flint K through 12
yes,
education
Flint
spending.
Public Schools.
Yes.
Who I'm going to throw some numbers at you here. They were the biggest benefactor, maybe in the nation, if you go by per pupil funding, because of federal pandemic funding. So I'm going to throw a number at you. They're from per pupil. What they received in federal funding due to the pandemic was $49,996, just below 50,000. I'll get into why that happened, but to put that in perspective, a couple things. There is a school district called Goodrich down the road in Genesee. Their per pupil funding for the COVID was $1,662. So from Flint, $49,900, Goodrich, $1,662. The reason for that is the funding for the pandemic was based on a lot of the formula was based on the affluency of the schools, or the lack of affluency of the schools. So Flint got so much money because 96% of its enrollment are considered economically disadvantaged, which means they're on some type of subsidy. So when you look at, here's the numbers that they got. In pre-pandemic, in June of 19, they got $13.6 million from the federal government. Okay. In June 2020, it went from $13.6 million to $20.2 million for federal government funding. Then in 2021, it went from 20.2 to 33.9. And in June of 2022, it went from 33.9 to 42.1. So what's happening is the total general fund total revenues in 2019 for the city of Flint was $66.6 million. The last 2 years, it's been $80 million. Now, what's fascinating about that is not just a $14 million increase in funding, but at the same time, they've lost about 25% of their students. Okay, they're in 2019, they had 4,200 students. Just last year, 2025, 3,042. And the state puts out enrollment numbers faster than any other information. And it's gone down again to roughly about 2,800. So this is a phenomena in Michigan public schools where you see a school district completely drained of students, but gets a huge injection of cash at the same time. And so what have they done with that money? Well, in 2019, they had 514 employees and about $22.8 million payroll. 2022, 374 employees, $22.4 million payroll. So the payroll has dropped about 400,000, but they've lost about 138 employees. So what's happened is the average salary for an employee in Flint in 2019 went from 44,000 in 3-year period to 60,000. So they've benefited the most, but Flint's kind of an interesting, a tough school just to figure out, because in 2020-21, they've had all this increase in money. The average teacher salary there was $61,493. That's $3,000 below the state average. So the teachers are not making a ton of money there. Amazingly, in 2010-11, the average teacher salary in Flint was $61,899. In 2020-21, 10 years later, it was $61,493. It dropped $400. Now, that doesn't mean teachers got a cut in pay. That's not what happened in Flint. What that means is that the reason why their average salary went down is that so many teachers retired who were at the top of the pay scale, and they were replaced by new teachers who started at the bottom end of the pay scale. And that's how you end up getting, over a 10-year period, a lower teacher salary, because the teachers, if you go look, are making less, are not making less money. Matter of fact, there is, I said earlier, the average employee is making like $20,000 more a year over a 3-year period. It's also, to put this in perspective, the median household income in Flint's $32,358. So a $61,000 teacher salary is what, $29,000 more than what the median household average is in that city. So Flint has always had a history of being one of the most well-funded school districts in Michigan. It's even more now due to the pandemic fund.
Right, the influx of federal dollars. So anything else to add on that, Tom? I mean, those are fascinating numbers. And I live here in Flint. I don't have children in public schools here. But again, it's pretty fascinating. I do have friends in the charter school system in Genesee County. And do you have any basis for comparison there?
No, I guess the takeaway I get from the whole Flint situation is the federal money is going to dry up, at least the federal pandemic money. Now, they've always done well in terms of how much money they get. So if you look at, I'm going to give you the funding for 2020-21. Okay. So this is like just the first year of the pandemic, really. Their per pupil funding, okay, overall for the school district, for their operating budget, for Flint schools was $26,121 per pupil. Okay. The state average was $12,000. Okay. So they more than doubled what the state average was for per pupil funding. And part of that was the federal funding. They got $10,979, Flint did, in per pupil federal funding in 2020-21. State average, $1,187. So they're getting, was it $9,800 more per pupil than the average school district in the state of Michigan. So it's just, that is one of the, I guess the irony is it's one of the poorer cities in America. 35% of the people in Flint live in poverty. Yet the school district is one of the most well-funded. You wouldn't know that. Most people don't know that.
Right. And there are still many and very large unoccupied school buildings that they're saying that need to be torn down, but they say that they can't do so because the money's just not there to do it.
Well, and here's why there's empty buildings. 2013-14, 7,200 students in Flint. 2022-23, 2,841. They lost about 4,400 students in a 9-year period, which is an incredible drop. They went from 7,200 in 2013-14 to 2,800 in 2022-23. And as you know, in Michigan, money follows the students. So that's a huge loss in revenue. Okay. Yet this federal money has saved them. And also it's an unfortunate situation with the Flint water crisis, but the school district also benefited from that disaster, and they got a lot of extra funding. I would say for the last 10 years, Flint's been getting close to double what, or 50% to double of what the typical Michigan school district gets.
Great. Anything else to add to this, Tom?
No.
Okay. Well, great. Okay. Well, let's move along. We've got about 5 minutes left, and wanted to talk a little bit about a poll that we wrote about earlier this week, and that is on right to work. And it turns out that although we have a large not a large majority, but there is a majority of Democrats in the House and Senate, as well as a Democrat governor, who have all expressed their desire to repeal Michigan's right to work law that was passed in 2012. A poll that was conducted shows that overwhelmingly Michigan residents, Michigan voters, would like to see right to work stay exactly as it is right now. And the fascinating thing is the demographics that are in the story. It says that 70% of Michigan registered voters oppose a repeal. And of those opposed, 83% say they are Republicans, 67% Democrats, and 76% are independent. So that's there's a margin of error there between plus or minus of 1.9 percentage points to plus minus 4.5 percentage points. And the group that did this study actually has some degree of acceptability, including by 538, which is a website that focuses on opinion poll analysis, politics, economics, and sports blogging. So, and the name of the company is Survey USA. They receive a A grade from 538. So to the question, workers should have the right to decide whether to join a labor union, was given a 3.3 percentage point credibility interval. And the second question, currently the state of Michigan has a right to work law. This law allows workers to belong to a labor union if they wish, but workers are not required to belong to a union in order to get a job or keep a job, was given a 3.1 percentage point interval. So the poll said 37% of respondents either belong to a union or have an immediate family member who belongs to a union, and the credibility interval for the response was roughly 4.5 percentage points. So that's pretty compelling information there. Would you not agree, Tom?
Yeah, I my take on any right to work, because I'm not sure how many people remember this, but due to the Supreme Court Janus ruling, the public sector employees will always have the choice of whether to join a union or not. So this applies to private sector union employees.
Correct. Okay. We're getting a little thin on time, so I want to pick Scott McClallen's brain. You filed a story on the Monday announcement of nearly $1 billion of subsidies and packages and tax incentives given it to Ford Motor Company to build a EV battery plant in Marshall, Michigan.
Yeah, the plant is expected to cost $3.5 billion, and Ford says it will create 2,500 jobs. So the $1 billion broken down is $210 million in critical industry program, $772 million in Renaissance zone property. It's a 15-year tax break and a $36 million loan. But not everyone really sees it as a good thing. John Mosina, he's the president of the Center for Economic Opportunity. He said that since 1995, Michigan has lost more than 185,000 manufacturing jobs despite continued funding.
Okay, well, that's all well and fine. One of the partners in the Ford endeavor, they're going to share in some of the licensing of technology and what have you. They're not receiving any of the actual incentives, but it's it's a group from China, and Senator Marco Rubio from Florida had one or two things to say about that. Can you weigh in on that, Scott?
Yeah, Rubio was asking for a review of the agreement terms, and he requested that no federal funds go to the Chinese-based company, the CATL. Right.
And I talked to Emma Berg, who is a spokesperson for Ford, and she assured me that that is not the case, that no federal funds will be diverted to but then you get into the whole question of fungibility of funds. So that's something that might warrant a little bit more investigation down the road. But what I found interesting, that the day after this announcement was made, Ford announced that it was going to stop deliveries on Ford F-150 Lightning EVs because of, a battery issue. And apparently some of the batteries, not the ones that have been delivered or the ones that are already in dealerships and showrooms and on delivery lots, but ones that had yet to be delivered, some of the batteries caught on fire, which is kind of amazing. So I'm just wondering if they were holding back on that announcement, and that's sheer conjecture, because I could be totally off base here, that what happened was they just waited until the day after the announcement that all these incentives were going to be heaped on this new battery plant in what was called Blue Oval in Marshall. So I find that kind of interesting.
Definitely. Yeah, I wonder if that $1 billion will help fix that problems, or maybe improve the Ford F-150 EV towing capability, because right now it leaves much to be desired.
Right. Well, thank you, Scott. And Scott McClallen is the Center Square's Michigan correspondent. And thank you, Tom Gantert, who is the Center Square's managing editor at large. He's the gadabout. He is jumping around from state to state, uncovering and doing remarkable investigative journalism. So thank you both. Michigan in Focus is powered by the Center Square, a production of America's Talking Network. You can find all of the Center Square's great podcasts at americastalking.com. That's americastalking.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we ask you to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor of the Center Square Newswire Service. Listen for another episode of Michigan in Focus next week.